It's a long walk from the back all the way up here. It's not long enough, though, because I'm still trying to figure out in my head exactly what I'm going to say, especially after Steve. But I found this quote from Marx that was written for the New York Tribune, I believe in 1851 or somewhere late 1840s, early 1850s. And it says, it's from an article, Germany at the Outbreak of the Revolution. Everyone knows nowadays that wherever there is a revolutionary convulsion, there must be some social want in the background. There's more after that, but I cut it off at that point. And it follows up with, the want may not yet be felt as strongly as generally as might ensure immediate success, but every attempt at forcible repression will only bring it forth stronger and stronger until it bursts its fetters. I started with that because, of course, struggle itself is dialectical, and talking about Karl Marx, but as well as about Malcolm X, and how he, at the end of his life, became an anti-capitalist. You have to ask a question about the period in history that we are in right now. And maybe it's not productive to ask what would Malcolm X have done, or what would Karl Marx have done were they alive right now, because they have been dead for some time right now, but you can glean from the things that were written and things that were said and the things that they did as to how they would relate to the current conditions that people are faced with now and what the struggle calls for in this period of history. I remember I grew up during a period, I'm from Erie, Pennsylvania. I'm a child of factory workers. My father still works for GE, and when I was a kid, my mother worked for a ceramics factory. They were both from Mississippi, so they grew up in Mississippi. My mother partly in Mississippi and Detroit, but for the most part Mississippi during American apartheid. And they moved to Erie in their late teens after getting married to get jobs in the factories. And they were the first in my family to go that far north to get jobs in the factories from Mississippi. As teens, they would pick cotton to earn some money. But I'm a child of the era when Jesse Jackson ran. And I can remember when Jesse Jackson ran for president and what it felt like as a kid. I also remember the crack epidemic and what it felt like in our neighborhoods when the only means to sustain themselves, a lot of young people indulged in the underground economy to provide for themselves and their families. And I remember seeing people who were addicted on it and what they looked like. These images are burned in my mind, and I can't forget them no matter how hard I try. I remember those things. I remember being in Erie, Pennsylvania, and people think it snows here. I just moved here from Colorado, and people would complain, you ain't seen any snow till you seen lake effect snow. In Colorado, it dumps like maybe a foot. People are like, oh my God, how are we gonna get around? Lake effect snow is like 3 feet. It's deep freezes where trees fall, where it gets so cold that the trees snap and fall, power lines and the poles snap and they just tip over. That's how cold it gets. That's lake living. That's what it was like. But imagine that when you don't have any heat or electricity. Imagine a family of 4 hovering around a kerosene heater, and you cook your meals on top of that kerosene heater, and you take baths by boiling water on top of that kerosene heater and pouring it into a sink. Those are the conditions. Those are the things that I remember being a kid growing up in Erie, Pennsylvania in the 80s. And these were the conditions that a lot of the people that I grew up with lived under, without broken homes, being raised by their grandparents, raised by one parent, being extremely poor. But it was also a period where you had a person who was running who I remember as a kid and asking my father about Jesse Jackson. He said, well, he's not going to win. But the hope that he had, that he expressed, and that we had, even though we couldn't vote for Jesse Jackson, it meant something to us. And it was more than the fact that Jesse was black. It was the fact that Jesse spoke for us. If it wasn't for Jesse, when I was a kid, I may have not thought that I was anything, but Jesse told me that I was somebody. That's what we remember of the Jesse Jackson. We remember him being a fighter and him actually talking about the conditions that we were faced and standing up to fight against those conditions. But we're in a period now where things are different. We are in a period where we will most likely, but you never really know, I don't want to even say most likely, but it's very, very likely that we're going to have the first black president of the United States. And that speaks to a certain social consciousness and workers, especially white workers, the fact that they would be willing, especially when you have black people so demonized, especially young black men, so demonized in a society that if you just walk in a white neighborhood, people will still call the cops on you if it's night. Or try knocking on somebody's door to ask for directions at 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening in a strange neighborhood in the suburbs, and see the look on their faces if they even answer the door. But at the end of the day, come January 21st, the state itself is still going to be the same old racist, repressive, oppressive state. There are going to be 1 million black people in prison. The conditions in New Orleans would not have changed, and we can't really expect that they would change for the people who live there. It's still going to be hard to find a job in general come this time next year, but especially if you're black. You're still going to have to worry about walking down the street at night and some pig stopping you and searching you, or worse, just because of the way that you look. You're still going to have to deal with the fact that our culture, see, I grew up during the golden age of hip-hop. And when we say golden age of hip-hop, what we mean is Public Enemy. We mean Poor Righteous Teachers. We mean Boogie Down Productions. We mean Queen Latifah. Not Queen Latifah of Bringing Down the House, but Queen Latifah of Ladies First. That's the Queen Latifah we remember from the golden age of hip-hop. But now we have our culture completely co-opted and made to be something that makes us look as if we're superficial people. Make us think that they look as if what we care about is superficial things, material things. And then the people that judge us are the people that have owned those material things based off of our labor the whole time anyway. But why am I, we're talking about Marx and about Marx being right. So basically, is what I'm trying to get to is when you look at the conditions that we have now and you match them with any period in history, you have to actually look at a lot of different factors, because it is dialectical. There are a lot of things. We can't just dismiss things. You can't just dismiss a Barack Obama and say, he ain't about shit. You'd be making a very serious mistake, and you'd be making a very serious mistake because the hopes and dreams of black people are tied up in his campaign. People are voting for him, even if it's just to have a black face. Damn it, we got that right to have a black face to be president of this goddamn country. And it ain't like having him, all of a sudden people are going to say, okay, well, things are great now. The conditions are still going to be the same. The conditions are going to get worse. If white workers are feeling the pinch, then oppressed workers are feeling that triply. Doubly, triply, quadruple, however you want to say it, that pinch is being felt more by the most oppressed, because this system was built off, just as Steve said in his speech before me, this system was built off of the oppression of the darker people in this corner of the world, and the importation of other African people to the shores to build up the wealth of the Western Hemisphere. The wealth of the Western Hemisphere was built by African and indigenous people. That is the reality. And in order to do that, there had to be an institution of an ideology of the supremacy of European peoples.